Welcome back to the studio. Today we're going to be working on Radiant Garden. I have all of my blocks fused in place, making sure that I fuse them properly using both time, heat, and steam. The whole process on that is just peel, place, and press. All of the applique shapes are laser cut. They're pre-fused with Steam 2, so you just have to peel the paper backing off, position them, reposition if necessary, and then when you're ready you can fuse it using heat and steam. Now I used an iron, a dry iron with a spray bottle. That's my preferred method. That way I don't have to worry about my iron leaking, and I'm clumsy. I've dropped irons many times and eventually I find that they leak and sputter. So I use a dry iron. Today I'm going to be putting my blocks together. After I get all the blocks together, I have two blocks that I have to go revisit because they had some applique shapes that overlapped the seam in between two blocks. So I'm going to go back and revisit those two, finish up those last few pieces of laser cut applique, and then I'm going to be cutting the inner border and the outer border. Now I almost always go for an inch finished inner border, which means I'll cut my strips 1.5 inches, so they'll finish at 1 inch. And I will probably go somewhere around 6 or 7 inches for the outer border. Now that doesn't mean that I'm going to have that finish at that size. I can always trim it down after it's done quilting, but I like to have plenty of room, and I may even go a little bit larger than that today in case I want to do something really special for the border, a really beautiful quilting element. I haven't decided yet. So my first step, I have my instructions. The instructions from Urban Elements are very clear for this process of the kit, and it lays out step by step which two blocks you join first, and then after you get the units joined, then you would join some of those units together all the way down until you get to 2 halves of the quilt, and then you sew those together in the end. I can always trim up the edges if I need to once all the blocks are finished. But before I get to that step, I'm going to go ahead and just hit all of my blocks with a fresh hot iron just to make sure they're all nice and crisp, and that way the seams go together beautifully and I don't have any distortion from little tiny wrinkles or puckers. So I'm going to go ahead and clear off the space for me to iron, and then we'll move over to the machine. I don't know if you noticed during the opening, I have put the color cover sheets on each block, and I'm going to do that again after I get them all ironed, just to make sure that I have the blocks in the correct position and the correct location as I'm seaming them together, because they're all very beautiful, but they do look a little bit alike, so I don't want to get them mixed up as I'm joining them together. I want to have a really beautiful finish. So I'm going to go ahead and do that step, and then we'll see where we're going. I've given all of the blocks a fresh iron just to make sure the edges are really nice and crisp. If you fused properly at the beginning, you shouldn't have any problem with your edges. I've oriented the blocks exactly as they were on the color cover sheet, so that I'm absolutely certain that I have them in the right position and I have the right blocks. And I'm just going to follow the instructions from the very beginning on the assembly, and we're joining block 1 and block 2. The seam is going to be here, and I'm going to do these one at a time just to make sure I get all of them joined properly, and then after we do, we will go ahead and iron those blocks, and we'll just continue on that process until each of these units are sewn together, and then we'll start joining units. This is the seam we're going to join, and you can absolutely pin or clip here to make sure you get a perfect seam. I purchased some washi tape. This is just a little piece of tape. It has a black line, a red line, and a blue line, and those are all 1/4 of an inch apart. And you can buy this and just use a piece of it in front of your sewing machine so that it is a 1/4 inch guide as the fabric feeds into the machine, just to help you get the correct placement with the block. It's fairly cheap, and you only need to stick it on the table every once in a while when it falls off. So that's just a cute little tip for helping to get your accurate piecing. Now I'm just going to line these up while my machine turns on, and I'm going to put a couple little pins in there, just making sure my corners are absolutely lined up. You may find that your blocks may be slightly different sizes, but you can always trim these up also after you're finished seaming. I'm just going to be using a 1/4 inch foot and a 1/4 inch seam. I'm just lining up the edge of the block with that washi tape just to make sure that I keep the block feeding in straight. And if it helps, you could use a ruler when you're applying your washi tape to your sewing table. Now this is going to be a little bit like sewing aerobics. Well, not in this case since it didn't sew. I'm going to thread the machine again. Looks like I didn't thread it after I wound my bobbins. And we'll start again. But each of these seams is going to be getting up, sewing, ironing, I need a sharper pair of scissors. These machines always have a needle threader, but do I use it? No. And just that fast, my blocks got out of alignment. So I'm going to go ahead and do the step of repinning again. I don't usually do a stay stitch at bottom of or top of my seam. I know some people will sew over their pins, so I don't like to. So now I have the first and second block together. What I'm going to do is press this on the top and then open the seam up, and I'll press it again in one direction. Of course, look at your instructions to make sure with any pattern if they give you an indication which way to iron the seam. Now I'm on to block 3 and 4. These are going to go underneath block 1 and 2. So you're going to want to make sure that you iron the seams in opposite directions. If you iron the 1 and 2 to the right, do 3 and 4 to the left. That way when the blocks join together where that seam is, they'll interlock or nest together and you won't have a bulky seam. back to the iron. I have units 1 and 2 put together and 3 and 4. These are going to be joined together. On the top seam, the seam allowance is folded or ironed that way, and on the bottom one it's ironed that way. So when we overlap these, they're going to interlock. So one will be going one direction, one will go the other, and that helps divide the bulk of the seam allowance. And that's going to be where I pin first, is that intersection of the 4 pieces. And I want to make sure I get a really beautiful connection there. Should be perfectly flat when you touch it with your fingers. And then I can line up these other seams with a few pins just to keep them feeding nice through the machine. This will be a pretty big chunk once we have this seam done. I've already looked ahead, and I know that block 5 joins together units A and B, which are block 1, 2, 3, and 4. I don't like that crunching noise the machine makes when it sews over a needle. I don't like to break a needle, so I always try and slow down and remove those pins as I go through. So now we have a larger unit, and we can put block 5 here. But I'm going to go ahead and iron that seam, and then we can get to block 5. I keep following along the instructions. They're sewing together other units first, but I'm just going to go ahead and put block number 5 onto this larger unit. So I'm just going to flip that over. As I go, I keep pinning each piece and also ironing each block before I add it on, just to make sure that the edges are nice and crisp. I know I've said it already several times, but this particular batik background, well, I used it as a background, really fell in love with this. I bought this several times in this kind of powder blue lavender. I bought it in a purple. I bought it in green. It's a really good fabric. I like the way it blends all the colors, picks up all the colors in the block. I'm going to go ahead and iron this one. Once we finish ironing this, we really have half of the quilt top put together. So I'm going to go ahead and proceed doing these blocks for the bottom half as well. It's pretty much the same process, and then we'll see what this whole top looks like when we get it together. You can see I have the bottom half finished and the top half finished. All we have left is this one seam. And just as a note, this kit did not call for any kind of sashing, but if you did some math, you could go ahead and add sashing in between the blocks if you wanted to, just to make it a little bit bigger or to make the blocks pop a little bit more. I'm not doing that. I kind of like the way it looks now. It's more like a garden scene or a collage, so I'm leaving it as is. I'm just going to go ahead and pin these two units together, really watching where the two seams intersect. Again, I ironed those seam allowances in opposing directions so that they would nest. So that's where I'm going to take the most time. I'm going to start there and then work out from that intersection. It's a beautiful day. It's beautiful outside. It's not hot at all, but I know when the spring comes, the summer's not far behind, and I'm not a big fan of the heat. So I just want to put enough pins in here to make sure that the blocks are lining up. Probably would be wiser to do this on a flat surface, but sometimes it's hard to change old habits. I bet you have some old habits you'd like to change. I can't be the only one. And I goofed around and my pen came out. I've already eaten today, but I'm already thinking about dinner. I made sort of a ground pork, and I took coleslaw and used it as my stir fry. The coleslaw bag with just the cabbage and carrots. It was pretty good. Probably have leftovers tonight, so I don't have to cook again. So this is my last big seam. And then we can go ahead and get the inner border and the outer border cut and sewn on. I think as soon as I have this inner and outer border put on, I'm going to go ahead and pick out a backing and get this loaded on the machine. That would be the next video in this procedure. And I could go ahead and get that finished for airing at a later date. I've been doing very little personal sewing except for the projects that you've seen here. And I always find when I haven't sewn for a while for myself that I want to start with easy project. So I've got about 3 or 4 easy ones picked out for me. But I also have a project in mind for the next little series. Just double checking my seam and it's good. I have retained my excess pieces for the overlapping blocks. You can see here is a butterfly in that overlaps the seam here, and a dragonfly that overlaps the seam here. This is block 2 and 3, and I think this is 10, 9, 8, 8 and 7 and 8, I think, or 8 and 9. But I'm going to go ahead and slip the pattern back underneath where the seam is, and I'm going to use the pieces that I've saved and go ahead and put those pieces in place. You can see here a nice empty space where the butterfly is going to go, so I'll do that one first. Pulled the old light box out again, just so you can see where the pattern is on that seam. And again, we're just going to peel the paper backing off of each of the pieces. It's always nice to refer to the the color cover sheet. If you have any question about where a piece goes, you can always lift up the pattern. If you need to, you can score the back of the paper with a seam ripper or a pen. I don't usually have any problem getting this paper backing off. And I just bumped my pattern with my belly. It's pretty easy to see where these pieces go. This is going to have another one of those sections. I used a Pigma pen to color in the markings for the antenna. These pieces are all repositionable, so when you put a piece in the wrong place like I did, you can just pick it back up and move it. It's not permanent until you fuse it with steam and heat. And then I have my 2 little antennas, the end of the antennas. Those you really have to be careful with because they're a little bit thicker and they are prone to falling off before you get them fused. And because they're thicker, you have to hold the iron in place a little bit longer on that ultra suede. But I'm going to go ahead and fuse this now with the iron. I'm going to remove my light box and my paper pattern, and then we can repeat the process for the dragonfly. As you can see, I have all the pieces in place for my dragonfly, and you can see it overlaps this seam here. That'll be more visible once the light goes out. So I can go ahead and remove my light box and fuse the butterfly and the dragonfly, and then connect both the antenna to the head using a micron Pigma pen. I'm just going to be using a micron Pigma pen. This is a 01. And if you could either just make long lines, or you could do smaller sketching lines if you're a little unsure of yourself. And these are really archival, they're fabric safe, they're heat safe, but if you want you can go ahead and heat set it just for a second. It doesn't really require it, but I'm going to do the same thing for the dragonfly. And that is the quickest way. If you wanted to, you could also do an embroidery stitch, or you could, while you're long arm quilting or domestic quilting, you could just change the thread and do some black quilt stitching there, and that would do your antenna. So I'm going to go ahead and cut my inner and outer border, and that's going to be next. You can see the 1.5 inch strip is going to finish at 1 inch once I get it done. I have this purple inner border on the top and bottom. I'm going to go ahead and sew a strip on the 2 sides, and then we can get to the much larger outer border, which is in green. Well, we have the inner border put in all the way around, and we have the green outer border on both the top and bottom. So I'm going to have to trim this one edge, but after that what we have left is just to put the 2 long sides on the outer border. Now I've made this outer border pretty big. It's like 8 inch cut, so that would be about a 7.5 inch finished. And that's because I'm toying with the idea of doing a border and then doing the panto inside the body of the quilt. I won't decide that till I look at the patterns, but that gives me the option. I can always trim it down. So I'm going to go ahead and trim off this one edge and then pop on these last 2 sides, and then this top is finished. I'm on my last section of the outside border on the last side. My studio has little scraps of fabric on the floor, so I feel like a bona fide quilter today. I don't know if I mentioned, today's Saturday for me, and this is a wonderful way to spend a Saturday, a sunny Saturday. And I'm sure I've mentioned, but I love this batik background on this kit. This whole kit is so exuberant. I'm really looking forward to having the quilting done, the border, the binding on, the sleeve on it, and have it hanging. This is going to make a really great addition to the studio. Talk about a quilt filled with joy. And just like a runner, a marathon runner, I've made it to the finish line. So now I'm going to go ahead and iron up these seams, get all of the edges trimmed off nice and square, and then we can go about picking out the backing for the next phase of this project, which will be the quilting. But I'm going to show you this when we get it all ironed out and trimmed off. But I'm really excited to have made it to this phase. It really feels like a quilt once you have the border on, and I know it's especially true once the quilting is done and then the binding. Then it truly is quilted. But it feels good to have made it this far, especially since you came along for the ride. Well, we got it done. I know you can't see it all because it's kind of a large piece, but we have the inner and the outer border. All the blocks are complete, and everything's ironed and ready to go. So that's like a huge bit of progress for today. The studio's messy with little pieces of fabric on the floor. That really makes me feel productive. So next step for me is to get this loaded on the machine. I'm probably going to do that starting today or tomorrow. Of course, it won't pop up at the same time as this one does. but we almost have this one finished. And as I said earlier, I'm really excited about seeing this in the studio, because out of everything that we have hanging, I think this is probably the brightest, most cheerful, exuberant quilt that I have done here in the studio to date. All of them are beautiful, but this one is particularly bright and cheerful. So I'm looking forward to having this hanging in the studio. As I said, I made the border extra big in case I want to do a border only treatment and then do a panto in the body of the quilt. I'll decide that after I go through the catalog and look at what my options are for quilting. So we won't know that until I've had a chance to go through and have a good study of what is available. Also, I don't know if I'm looking at perhaps a geometric pattern, which would be a nice juxtaposition to all the curves and florals of the quilt, or if I want to do something very feathery, which both of them kind of appeal to me at the moment. So I'll have to look and see what all of the options are. And believe me, I know the last show I went to, there were over 5,000 different pantos in the catalog, and we haven't done a show for a couple years now, so I know that the catalog has expanded. I'm constantly seeing new patterns come up on the Facebook page, and if you haven't done so, yes, like us on Facebook, and you will see all of those new patterns as they are added to the catalog. Also, it'd be really great if you take a minute and hit the subscribe button so you know when new videos come up, and it also helps the algorithm to let other people know about the quilting. So that would be awesome. Anyway, that's it for me today. Thanks for joining us here in the studio, and until we get this on the frame, take care of yourself and take care of each other. So I don't think I'm going to be ironing down here.